These are not my lines. This is from NCERT textbook, 11th standard, where it says India had to wait for 1,000 years for civilization to return. After Magadha made contact with the Greeks, suddenly we became civilized. Suddenly we got Brahmi script, Ashokan pillar, writings and all those things. Till then we were uncivilized people. If you have superior knowledge like Shushruta Samhita, like Aryabhatta, Surya Siddhanta and things like that, they say, wait a minute, you must have copied it from the earlier civilizations, the Greeks, the Romans, and Babylonians and so on. So clearly we are seeing that this artifacts of the so-called Vedic civilization are there in Harappa. They said that chariots came to India from the Aryan invasion or migration, but in Sanauli, about 30 kilometers north of New Delhi, we are finding that we have chariot burials, not one or two, lines of chariot burials that can be dated tentatively to 2200 BCE. And these are war chariots, these are not donkey carts or bullock carts. The reality through astronomy, what we are finding is that Vedanga Jyotisha itself can be dated to 1400 BC. If Vedanga Jyotisha is 1400 BC, where is 200 BC for Sutra period, which we get from linguistics? Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. My pranams to the hundreds of teachers whose works have enlightened us. It's a real pleasure to come here and speak in my hometown of Bengaluru. And it's also very good to speak at Sangam talks in Bengaluru. So far I've been giving Sangam talks in New Delhi. So this is good to give it in Bengaluru itself. So please do support Sangam talks here. Let's grow the branch over here too. So my thanks to Rahul Diwan and Amol for arranging these talks. And of course, thanks to all of you for coming here on this day. So let me begin with some opening remarks, just to set the stage right so that we don't lose context of what we are saying. We're not beating our chest saying this is who we are, we've done all of these kind of things. Let's be realistic over here. Every civilization has contributed to the progress of humanity, both locally in their own domain of impact and globally in varying amounts. But today's Eurocentric worldview, which all of us are victims of, has effectively erased non-Western sources of knowledge, and a great deal of them comes from parochialism of Christianity that has additionally contributed to erasure of non-Christian sources of knowledge. I'm going to highlight several instances of Indian contributions to IKS. So we got to define the problem first, right? What are we doing here? What are we talking about? When we say Eurocentrism, this is a formal definition. It's a worldview or interpretive framework that places Europe and the so-called West at the center of human history, knowledge, and value, portraying European experiences, institutions, and categories as universal, normative, and superior to every other civilization. So this is what we define when we say Eurocentrism. It's an ideological orientation with European civilization as the origin of modernity, what we call modernity, right? And science and rationality. It is the standard by which all societies are measured through the Eurocentric lens, and it's a culmination, at least positioned as a culmination of human progress, with non-European societies as static, primitive, or derivative, copying European sources. This is the Eurocentrism we are talking about. And if we look at it in a historical sense, it starts with Greek exceptionalism. The Greeks thought only those who know the Greek language are civilized. Everybody else is uncivilized. So this kind of exceptionalism has its roots in that kind of thinking. And Rome, which inherited the Greeks after 145 BCE when they conquered the Greek civilization, it projected itself as a universal civilization. After the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire and started conquering, they were the universal civilization. And when the Romans adopted Christianity in 330 current era, it claimed universality, positioning itself as a true faith. Everybody else was pagans and those kinds of things. And the Christians considered the others as pagan, outside civilization and salvation. So to them and later Renaissance scholars and others, it was only the Christian world had a history. The others didn't have a history, right? That's how they positioned themselves as. And going further, what we see is Christianity was adopted by the West at some point in time, and the Roman Empire fell thanks to the Germanic invasions and several other things. And the Eastern Roman Empire was called Byzantine, with today's Istanbul as Constantinople and so on. When the Ottomans overran that and it fell to the Muslims, that is when these people started inventing Greek-centric texts to rival the so-called Muslim works. So the Europeans then saw the Muslims had vastly superior knowledge to the Christians. So whole industry was there in trying to invent new so-called Greek-centric textbooks and so on. And the 15th to 16th century, the Europeans recentered their history with Greco-Roman as an apex right at the top, universal foundation of civilization. And it came hand in hand with colonialism, with Christian doctrines supporting European usurpation of native lands and so on. And when we see colonization, universal claims of science, only knowledge generated in Europe was universal. Indian knowledge was dismissed as traditional or mythological, so it was completely dismissed out over there. And colonized societies were seen at earlier stage of human development, awaiting European tutelage, European instruction and these kinds of things. So colonial historiography through European lens sidelined, including misinterpreting Indian history. This is what we see over here. It became institutionalized thanks to the East India Company that became the British Empire and so on, asserting its influence throughout the world. We see emerging disciplines in social sciences. They universalized European frameworks, European philosophies. These are the standards with which everybody was seen. Anthropology, all these sciences are coming about with Europeans, the blonde, blue-eyed European as the apex, and everybody else was seen in relation to that. So European history was presented as story of humanity, and the rest were framed as lacking history or stagnant. How many times have you heard people say Indians don't have a history? That comes from this kind of thinking that's been deeply colonized, mind colonized into our people, right? So in present times, we see development studies assume that non-European societies must follow the European path of industrialization. Otherwise, you're not progressing, you're not modern. So these ideas have been ingrained into us, right? This is how we see ourselves. Even to the present day, we see ourselves in this manner. So I call Eurocentrism as a deeply rooted inferiority complex of the Europeans. And the history shows that the Greeks, in a very early period of time, learned from India, 1500 BCE to 200 BCE, and the Greeks were conquered by the Romans in 146 BCE. Rome adopted Christianity in Constantine's time in around 330 current era, and promptly they fell into dark ages because it was a period of time they're destroying the pagan libraries, so-called pagan libraries, destroying all of these things. And they adopted theocracy. In theocracy, God's will be done. You can't question that. What the church says is true. If you question it, it becomes blasphemy and things of that nature. So they fell into irrationality, illogical, irrational beliefs, and promptly into dark ages because it lost contact with India, the knowledge systems of India, the medicines of India, everything was gone. So they had dark ages for 1200 years where feudal Europe meaning that the nobility and the church controlled all of Europe. The peasants didn't have any power. They didn't have land, they didn't have power, and they were under the control of the feudal societies. It was marked by illiteracy, disease, superstition, backwardness. This is what they were. Backward in mathematics, medicine, astronomy in medieval times, due primarily to Christian doctrines. Even through 1800s when Darwin went off on his voyage of discovery, the church attacked him, including the so-called Scopes trial in USA in 1920s and 30s. You can see how backward they were even at that time, denying science and these kinds of things. So the clergy and the elite, they learned from the Muslims in Toledo and Sicily. The Muslims, after bin Qasim's time, I'll tell you later, how Indian knowledge was taken into Arabia and injected into the Umayyad and the Abbasid empires. All the way from India, Sindh, in Pakistan today, all the way to southern Spain, Indian knowledge was flourishing in these places. In the 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, the Christians were translating these things from, the Muslims had translated from Sanskrit to Arabic, and these people are translating from Arabic to Castilian, Castilian to Latin, and spreading it through Europe. That's how they're learning their knowledge. So with the fall of Byzantine fell to the Ottomans around 1400s and so on. That was a deep blow to the Christian pride because the Eastern Roman Empire has gone, Christianity, the Holy Lands, everything was gone. And these people could see the Muslims had vastly superior knowledge, and therein was born this whole Eurocentric ideas. To mask their inferiority complex, Eurocentrism evolved in this manner. They borrowed extensively from the Muslim works, which are in turn Indian works on mathematics, medicine, astronomy, sciences, they erased or renamed sources to avoid that humiliation that they're copying from the Muslims. They wanted to pretend that we too had this knowledge. And by the way, our ancestors were the Greco-Roman people who had all these texts. By the way, none of those texts we have original sources, right? These are all reconstructed in the 9th century, 11th, 12th, and so on. They reframed history as Greek and universalized European experience, especially after power. They got power with colonialization and industrialization, right? After that was secured, everything was European, right? They were the apex and so on. So this is the institutionalization primarily of their inferiority complex. That's how I position this. And several erasure mechanisms were followed in European historiography. One was renaming or appropriation. For example, calling Indian numbers as Arabic. An example is the methods of Aryabhatta, Brahmagupta, and others, the Kutuka algorithm, and so on. They were copied by the Muslims and called Al-Khwarizmi especially, and this was called algorithm. So renamed, and you lose track of where these things came from. And recovery narrative. They presented medieval translation as recovering Greek thought, right? That's how it was positioned. When they were copying from the Muslims, they were presenting it as, oh, we are only recovering what our ancestors knew. The Muslims and the Indians have preserved this knowledge for us, right? They copied from Greek sources, have preserved the knowledge. So they don't acknowledge Indian sources. This happened in Toledo and Sicily. And also dating compression, moving Indian achievements into frameworks that appear them as to make them derivative or contemporaneous with European epochs. And one primary example we have is Max Muller dating of the Vedas to 1500 BCE and so on. It pretends that these are much later works rather than earlier works. We labor under these kind of impositions even today, unfortunately. And we have got plagiarism, omission of citations. So these medieval translators, they omitted their Muslim sources where they got these things from and pretended that Greek origin for Sanskrit to Arabic to Latin works. Some examples are Toledan tables, Alphonsine. These are astronomy tables constructed from Aryabhatta's works that Copernicus used. But we don't know about this. It's called Alphonsine tables after the translation schools in Toledo. So these are the kind of things. And Avicenna was a medicine guy. Where did he get his sources from? Shushruta Samhita. That was translated into Arabic, and from Arabic into Latin. He learned that, translated into Latin, and they call it Avicenna's canon. So these are the kind of plagiarism, omission of citations. And epistemic dismissal, even at the intellectual levels, these so-called European philosophers like Hegel and Immanuel Kant and others, they dismissed Indian philosophy even as they were absorbing core Vedanta. They were taking Vedanta and putting it into their own frameworks, at the same time dismissing Indian philosophy as primitive and backward and these kind of things, and they were the apex of philosophy. And today's philosophy students still learn this nonsense, and they still continue in this manner. So this dismissal entrenched European supremacy once again. So what we are seeing is even in linguistics, historical linguistics, this was shaped by Eurocentric scholars who were driven and influenced by colonial expansion, which is non-Christian land usurpation, Christian and classical education. This privileged Greco-Roman antiquity as the origin of civilization, and racial theories classifying humanity hierarchically using the Nordic people as the apex at the top and everybody else in relation to them. And they use things like comparative method, assuming languages evolve linearly from primitive to civilized stage. And as an example, Chinese languages, Indian languages are archaic and so on. This tree model of descent, this is modeled after Darwin's analogies and presupposing a clear separation in ancestry. It's oversimplified in India that it has descended from Proto-Indo-European because India is a linguistic area. A linguistic area in modern linguistics means many languages co-evolved with interaction with each other. Like for example, if you say Tamil is the oldest or something else is the oldest, these battles are meaningless. We don't have the data to assert any of these things. The best we can say is we co-evolved over a long period of time. That's all we can say. So writing as a marker of civilization, right? Because God gave the word to Moses, right? The 10 Commandments was written in stone. So writing was exalted in that civilization. This completely discredits our oral tradition. We had an amazing oral tradition over thousands of years using Ganapatha and other such things with error-free transmission mechanisms. All that is gone thanks to these kind of things. So Sanskrit transmission was dismissed as mythic despite the precision that we had. Chronological assumptions. Every non-European chronology is forced into biblical timelines. And for example, India, we're all restricted to post 1500 BC. Everything in India is dated to that. That led to things like this. I've talked about this in my prior talks. I'm going to zoom over these things. For example, our historiography is a result of these 5 frameworks: the colonial, Eurocentric, missionary, the socialists in India, the Marxists. Each of them have hijacked the history of India, imposed their dogmatic ideologies, and led to a subversion of our identity in the present. Whether it's our textbooks, whether it's our media, government policies to the present day, the reservation policies, everything is an outcome of these kind of thinkings, where we are positioned as backward, primitive, superstitious, stagnant society in this kind of thinking. And this is not something new. In my talks I've shown colonial hegemony, Christian imperialism, and Eurocentrism with hand-in-hand convergent ideologies that has led to this overarching European imposition on us, which is the so-called, started as Aryan invasion and soon became an Aryan migration theory, and these things are imposed on us. So today we got our academia, there's a received wisdom for them. They don't question anything that these people have said. Blindly they accept everything and continue teaching these things, along with results from archaeology, which is co-opted, and genetics today, everything with circular dependencies, it continues to impact our identity. And like I always say in my talks, the result of this kind of false narrative that Aryans are invaded or migrated to India 1500 BC, illiterate nomads from Central Asia that destroyed a superior civilization. India had to wait for 1,000 years. These are not my lines. This is from NCERT textbook, 11th standard, where it says India had to wait for 1,000 years for civilization to return to Magadha, right? After Magadha made contact with the Greeks, suddenly we became civilized. Suddenly we got Brahmi script, Ashokan pillar, writings and all those things. Till then we were uncivilized people. So suddenly we got all of these things according to them. Then they say, yours is a young civilization. You have not had enough time to generate knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, medicine. So if you have superior knowledge like Shushruta Samhita, like Aryabhatta, Surya Siddhanta and things like that, they say, wait a minute, you must have copied it from the earlier civilizations, the Greeks, the Romans, and Babylonians and so on. That's how they position us. And they tell us that Brahmi came from the Semitic script called Aramaic from Levant into India. Aryans got Sanskrit into India from Central Asia. Math and sciences came from Greece, astronomy from Babylon, and they say British got us science, technology, rational thought. Turkic Muslims, they got us culture, cuisine, architecture, music, and even Bhakti. We didn't know Bhakti till St. Thomas. He landed in Muziris and taught us how to love divinity. Till then, we didn't have any such thing in this country. So this is the kind of positioning that has been done today. Very, very unfortunate. And my talks are all about getting to understand these narratives. Where are they coming from? What data did they use? What model did they use? Where is the reality for that? So I spent years on this kind of rational, logical analysis of data, whether it is linguistics model, archaeology, genetics, astronomy. I've analyzed these things through many, many ways. And in my several talks and Sangam talks, I've rebutted these things with textual evidence, archaeology, genetics, climatology, geology, astronomy. And my conclusion is, India is an ancient civilization. We got multidisciplinary evidence showing cultural continuity. Evidence is showing great antiquity, contrary to textbook assertions that come from Eurocentric ideas. For example, our texts, they know nothing about invasion or migration. If you take a sampling of scholars, Northern India, Southern India, ancient times, modern times, whether it is Abhinavagupta, Adi Shankara, Agatyar, Andal, all the way to Yajnavalkya, Vishakadatta, who is talking about Aryan invasion? Who is saying we are North Indians and you are South Indians? Who is saying that we had a battle, we pushed the fellows from the north to the south? In the south, who is saying we used to live in the north, we are pushed to the south? We have zero cultural memory in any work, any period of time, any geography. You'd presume that with such a big thing imposed on us like Aryan invasion, we must have some memory in our texts. Not one person is talking about that. What does that tell you? Common sense is staring at us in the face, but over the last 200 years, the British put that idea into our heads that we are Aryans and Dravidians, and this invasion model, and we have internalized this nonsense so deeply. And archaeology, this has got no ceramic record of invasions or migration. today's idea is if a new technology has come, rather a new people have come into a geographical area, you must see a change in the pottery style because they bring their style into our place, right? If there's a change in the pottery record, you can identify in that strata of soil, you can see this belongs to that period of time. But in India, there is simply no pottery style introduced from the outside. There is no evidence of similar pottery from India, whether in BMAC, Andrew Novo, and other such places. We have zero evidence from archaeology showing these things. So we got the OCP, black and red ware, painted grey ware, but there are several papers that have contested some of the assertions, earlier assertions on these things. So archaeology and paleontology show great antiquity of human presence in India. In my earlier Sangam talks, I've talked extensively about these things, how we got a continuous record of human habitation from 1 million years ago, Homo erectus samples, all the way to the Saraswati Sindhu and the Arikamedu, Kiradi and other such places. We got continuous record of human habitation in India. And B.B. Lal, who talks about continuity of civilization, he shows there's no periodization. If somebody says Vedic period, Harappa period, Buddhist period, this is nonsense because he's saying we have a continuum in every layer artifacts can be found. We have the proto-Shiva in Mohenjo-daro. You got the Yoga Asana terracotta figurines that is coming from Harappa and other such places. What are they doing there? Because yoga is so deeply central to Sanatana Dharma. So what is this doing over here? You got a swastika symbol from Mohenjo-daro, Shivalinga from Kalibangan, and Namaste pose over here. So clearly we are seeing that these artifacts of the so-called Vedic civilization are there in Harappa. So this tells you there's no periodization possible over here. Saraswati River, one of the very, very big things, right? The Rig Veda is talking about the Saraswati River flowing all the way from the mountains to the ocean, a powerful river at that. But this is dismissed as the mythical river by people like Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, and all of these people dismiss this as a mythical river. But then we know from satellite imagery that there was a river parallel to today's Sindhu, right? Parallel to that, there's been a river, and we have a whole lot of archaeological sites that have been found there. Scientific papers have been published that unambiguously, they say, yes, there is evidence of a river that flowed over here in the ancient past. And if we take a look at radiocarbon dating, this is a paper from Dikshit in Pune, and over here they have excavated from several places in the Saraswati Sindhu civilization. In Birana, some of the earliest dates come from in BCE, 7500 BC. That's 9500 years before we have found settlements in the Saraswati Sindhu. This is what this is telling us. And we have found chariots over there. They said that chariots came to India from the Aryan invasion or migration, but in Sanauli, about 30 kilometers north of New Delhi, we are finding that we have chariot burials, not one or two, lines of chariot burials that can be dated tentatively to 2200 BCE. And these are war chariots. These are not donkey carts or bullock carts, right? The archaeologist clearly says that these are horse-driven war chariots because they found shields, they found all kinds of things over there showing that. So this invalidates that Aryans brought the horse and chariot into India. Then if you look at metallurgy, this shows precedence in India, which invalidates the Eurocentric claim that Aryans got iron into India during the invasion period. This is a paper by a Japanese professor, 2018, where it shows the archaeological sites in India with iron. This is Gachibowli in Hyderabad, the earliest one, which is 2200 BCE. This is as of 2018, right? And we show this technology migrating northwards. If Aryans had come from here into India, we expect the earliest iron to be here. But the earliest iron here is 1200 BCE. 1200 BCE and so on. But the earlier iron is there in India. Bhadravati and other places are rich in iron ore in Karnataka, right? So we're seeing that iron in southern India is far more ancient than northern India. So this is a technology going north. And this news report came out earlier this year from Tamil Nadu government that in Shivagalai, they have excavated over there, and they have found artifacts that suggest that iron could be as ancient as 3300 BCE in India. I have no reason to doubt this. I think this is fairly accurate that it could be so. Genetics is a big topic. In my talks, I've shown there are several reasons to doubt what is coming out of the papers in genetics. There are problems with their models, methodology, data, samples, claims. I will not spend time talking about this, but don't trust the papers blindly. There are issues over there, even though it may come from Harvard and places like that. If you go dig deep into the data, models, and other things, there are questions to be raised at every single point. The reviewers aren't doing a decent job at asking the right questions over here. They're aligning with the linguistics theory. Vedic astronomy shows very great antiquity. In several of my talks have shown Vedanga Jyotisha at 1440 BC, Vishnu Purana Dhruva at Pole Star 2800 BC, Kritika at around 3000 BCE, and so on. We got a lot of artifacts that show great antiquity of the so-called Vedic civilization. If the Vedic civilization is 1500 BCE and later, why on earth do we have all these ancient dates in our texts, right? Scientifically, we can date these things. So this too shows this. So the summary is, we got a whole lot of evidence over here that suggests that we got activity happening in India anywhere from 8000 BC to 3000 BCE. That's what our texts, our internal evidence is showing us. But then linguistics, which is the received wisdom of colonial Eurocentric scholars, is an outlier. That is sitting there saying 1500 BCE. As a scientist, I have no option but to discard the outlier and saying this outlier cannot be trusted because we have preponderance of evidence that is telling us that here's where the reality of the civilization is. So there's no doubt in our minds based on these things that India is an ancient civilization contrary to Eurocentric assertions. So if we are an ancient civilization, we must show accumulation of knowledge because they are asserting that you're a young civilization, you have copied it from the Greeks and Babylonians. So we have to show evidence that we have accumulated knowledge, and that too can be shown in IKS. We got philosophical content, the Shruti, Smriti literature. We got encyclopedic contents in our Puranas. Puranas are encyclopedias literally in India. Humanities content like Arthashastra, Natya Shastra, scientific content on all of these things. So we got different categories of IKS, we got all of these things. And I have shown in my talks the transmission of Indic knowledge systems to the West. Where did Europe get its knowledge from? The backstory that Western texts would never admit. I've shown summary of out of India transmission. We can go to the earliest periods, 3000 BC to 1200 BCE, where in my talks, I've shown early transmission from India to Sumeria. And the evidences I've shown here, Rig Veda, Harappa trade, Sumerian internal accounts, archaeobotany. Then I've shown that in 2000 BCE, we have scientific papers that talk about a 200-year monsoon failure. Following that monsoon failure, we have evidence of Indians going out and settling the Fertile Crescent, which means the Nile River Valley, Euphrates River Valley, and the Tigris River Valley. We have evidence of these things. We also have evidence of the Hittites. The Hittites were in Turkey, where Turkey is today. We have evidence of transmission of knowledge to the Minoan culture. Minoans are the early Greeks, right? We have evidence of that transmission in addition. And if you go to the period from 600 BC to 200 BC, we got evidence of Greek philosophers coming to India and taking knowledge directly, whether it is Plato and Vaisheshika, recorded contacts, Skylax, Alexander, Pyrrhon, the Library of Alexandria, Pythagoras, Democritus, Hippocrates. I've given these evidences in my earlier talks. I'm not going to say that. I'm only summarizing these things, how Indian knowledge went out to the West. Then between 200 BC to 600 BCE, we had the Indo-Roman trade when Indians were directly trading with the Romans, right? They used to go, when trade winds were right, they'd come over here through the Red Sea, and here is Alexandria, land caravan to Alexandria, from Alexandria to Mediterranean countries. So this is the trade that was done in those days. We have evidence on Periplus of Erythraean Sea, Kushan era Brahmi from Berenike, and I've given so much of evidence on all of these things. Then we have out of India through the Jews, through Armenia, through Syria, through the so-called Syrian Christians, for example. I've shown how the Jewish people, they settled in India after the Romans had destroyed the second temple in Jerusalem. We had a wave of Jews coming and settling in India, in the Kerala. They were given permission to settle in Kochi and places like that. In the 2nd century itself, we have evidence of those people from there. They were sources of transmission in addition. Then we had Nestorians. Nestorians are people who denied some philosophical conditions on Christianity. They were called blasphemers and they were made to leave Byzantine. and they settled in Kerala. Today they are called Kerala Christians, right, or Syrian Christians and so on. So they were sources of transmission to Syria, which is Armenia and places like that. I've shown connections where the bishop Severus Sebokht in the 7th century, how he's talking about Indian knowledge. How does he know about Indian knowledge in the 7th century? Because of these transmissions. So we have clear evidence of many of these things. Then when Islam came on the scene, it burst on the scene 711, current era, when bin Qasim invaded Sindh. At that time, they kidnapped several of the Pandits and took them to Arabia, converted them, and forced them to translate from Sanskrit into Arabic. And we know some of the books like Suri Siddhanta, we know the Charaka Samhita, Shushruta Samhita. These are the books, and Brahmagupta's Brahmasputa Siddhanta. These books were all translated, and these were injected into the Abbasid Empire. All these countries in Arabia, in Algeria, in Tunisia, in Morocco, all the way to southern Spain, that was under the control of Muslims. Indian knowledge is injected from the 7th century onwards, right, 700 rather, 8th century onwards, injected into all these countries. I've given several evidences for these things. And from 1000 to present era into Europe. At that time, Europe was in dark ages. They were under the control of Christianity. But the elites would send their eldest son to go and study at the feet of the Moors are the Muslims, because they said they got superior knowledge to us. And they would come to Spain and study over there. In Christian Spain, which is in Toledo, there was a cathedral where the only job was to translate from Arabic into Castilian into Latin. And we got several evidences. I've given you a whole list of evidences in my talks on these things. This is how Indian knowledge diffused into Europe between 1000 to 1600 current era, leading to the so-called Renaissance, positioned as a flowering of Western thought and so on. And the question to ask is, how is illiterate, backward, primitive Europe, how did it start doing all of these things? Where did that knowledge come from? Can't come in a vacuum, right? So it has come through these transmissions over here. Then we have direct transmissions, the colonialization from 1700s to the present, where Indian knowledge is gone. So what I've shown to you over here is the reality. Out of India, knowledge transmissions from 3000 BC to the present time, a whole lot of transmissions to different areas. This is for the benefit of people who say that you're a jingoistic chap, everything came from India. Unfortunately, this is the reality. This is there in our history that nobody talks to you about. But once you put these things here, it becomes fairly clear that yes, in every period of time, India has got contact with other parts of the world, and we know the guys who took knowledge and went there. We have evidence of that knowledge used in that foreign culture. We also know that. So this is not acknowledged in any Western textbook, unfortunately, because they exalt the Greeks and Romans as an apex. So I'm going to now give you a few random instances of Eurocentric claims and where the reality is. And one of them is a case study of plagiarism, transmission of rhinoplasty, which is basically reconstruction of the nose, the origin of plastic surgery, literally, right? So we know the origin is Shushruta Samhita, where we have rhinoplasty that says, Shushruta said, you cut a flap of skin from the cheek or from the forehead, you fashion a nose for this person. He's given a procedure to do that. So this knowledge was transmitted to the Islamic world, Baghdad, 8th to 9th century, in the Abbasid Caliphate, House of Wisdom in Baghdad. They translated Shushruta Samhita, Charaka Samhita into Arabic, and this knowledge went through Arab scholars, Avicenna with Al-Razi, all these people. They integrated this into their works. It was transmitted to Europe, Sicily in 10th to 12th century, both in Toledo and in Sicily. And Arab medical works of Indian originals were translated into Latin. This was the basis of medical curriculum at the Salerno Medical School, Europe's earliest medical university, 11th century. They used only Shushrutta's works, Charaka Samhita. They had no knowledge of their own. This is used over there. So this has gone into the so-called Renaissance, 16th century, Gaspar Tagliacozzi, if I'm pronouncing that right. He was a professor in the University of Bologna, and he authored this particular book, and he's exalted as the first European book exclusively on plastic surgery, and he describes reconstructing the nose using skin flap from the arm. He says, cut it from the arm over here, and let that skin be used for the nose, the way I'm showing it. And guess what? You can't remove your arm till that is completely healed. It's completely impractical. How would that person sleep or walk for maybe about a month or so? You're supposed to be like this. That is what is shown over here, right? This is supposed to be the very impractical way. Shushruta had one from the forehead or from the cheek, very, very practical and so on. But anyway, this man is hailed in Eurocentric accounts as a father of modern plastic surgery. Do you see the pattern over here? It's a plagiarization, erasure, exaltation of Eurocentric sources, European sources, where Shushruta is forgotten over here. But here, with evidence, we can show you how did that knowledge go over here. This is a sample of what I'm going to do in the next few slides. Music. Many of you may wonder, why is this sa re ga ma pa da ni sa? Why is that related to do re mi fa sol la ti do? Why is it related? You might wonder that. As far as the West is concerned, the best they can do is music arose independently in India, China, and Greece. But my question is, why did they all get the same tonal differences between the major and the minor notes? Why did they all get the same? Is there something psychosomatic in the brain that we all chance on the same, converge to the same idea? Or is there a common origin? Anyway, there is something called psalmization, right? Where they position this guy, Guido of Arezzo. He developed new techniques for teaching and the use of ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la, which is based upon some biblical hymn that they have. So the first letters in each line of the biblical hymn, he says that's what they used, and this was suddenly such a fantastic pedagogical method that they could teach music from there on. They positioned him as the person who invented these kinds of things. And the facts are, the Saptaswara system is there in very ancient Indian works, right from Rig Veda, let alone Samaveda. Right from Rig Veda, we got Saptaswara appearing over there. Thousands of years before Guido, Indians had phonetically abbreviated the Sajja to Nishada, which system that we have, as Sari, Gama, Pada, Nisa, right? We have got already abbreviated this. And if you look historically, the documented use of phonetic abbreviation Sarigama appears in works by Dattilam and Bharata Muni's Nati Shastra, at least 500 BCE, if not much earlier than that. And the transmission mechanisms are shown: Pythagoras, Greek travelers, Indo-Roman trade, Muslim transmission. So what we are seeing here, once again, erasure, usurpation, and plagiarism at work over here through the Eurocentric mechanisms that I said. How Indian knowledge goes there. Now we blindly accept it and say, yep, do re mi, without realizing where that whole thing came from. One more, this is casual Eurocentrism, which is bandied about in magazines and things of that nature. There's a famous magazine called Quanta, which is a new online publication that talks about science and developments in science. Obligatorily, they exalt Greek sources. Here's one example where he's talking about cancer cells and so on, where he's saying the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates gave cancer its name, comparing the shape of a tumor and surrounding veins. There is no mention of any other civilization there, only exalting the Greeks. Whereas even if you ask Google's AI about this, it says that Shushruta Samhita, cancer is described as inflammatory or non-inflammatory swelling, and it goes on to describe the shapes of cancer and these things. Shushruta Samhita is thousands of years earlier than some of these guys. But what do you see? It's the exaltation of Greek sources more than anything else over here. So once again, because it's not Western, these things are ignored. One more of those things, again from Quanta magazine, normalize only Greeks. Here it says, in the 5th century BCE, a Greek mathematician made a discovery that shattered the foundations of mathematics, right? And so they say this was this Hippasus of this Metapontum in the Pythagorean school of mathematics, where he showed what we call irrational numbers now. Just to quickly tell you, we got natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, whole numbers from 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. Integers, these are all different negative and positive integers. Rational numbers are these things with decimal points. Irrational numbers are things you can't express it completely in an expansion like pi, for example, is a recurring ratio. So here, this man has apparently found this phenomena. For example, he said that hypotenuse cannot have a rational length if a certain condition is met over here. So he's talking about these things. Where is the reality? In Manava Sulba Sutra, which we can put to approximately 1800 BCE, he has provided several right-angle triples where he discovered square root of certain numbers like 2 and 61 cannot be determined exactly. What we call surds in our high school algebra comes from here. where he's talking about irrational numbers. He's provided triples for the right angle triangle with fractional sides. He also approximated pi to these values and so on. So what we are seeing over here is we got a mathematical tradition in India that's already got some of these developments, but these are erased in casual Eurocentrism, where they only exalt the Greek sources. If they tell it sufficient number of times, the entire world, the newer X population, the millennials and everybody else, Generation X, this is what they believe in. Then you go and say, you know what, Mano Silva Sutra that is there, people don't believe it. So the longer you keep erasing these things, the more entrenched Eurocentric ideas become in people's heads, very unfortunately. One more from Quantum magazine, and this one is talking about the notion, Ritalac attributes a notion that life sprang from the oceans to the Greek philosopher Anaximander, who was stunned by the diversity of life in the Aegean Sea and claimed that humans had evolved in the mouths of fish from the sea and so on. This is now related to multiple stories, right? We have the story in India itself of Manu, who rescues the fish and the fish saves him and all those things. That has somehow come over here. But then texts with far more authority and description are ignored. Ancient Hindu and Buddhist texts describe the origin of life to the primordial ocean, the Shalilam. We talk about these things. Where we say Vedas, they describe a primordial state of undifferentiated cosmic waters existing before creation. In the Nasadiya Sukta, we are saying at first there's only darkness wrapped in darkness, and the one, Brahman, sprouts from these waters and gives rise to all other things. In one more in the Rig Veda, Hiranyagarbha Suktam, that is also talking about the same thing. So we are seeing this notion that life came from waters is contained in Indian texts, but when they exalt these things, they only exalt the Greeks who are copied it from Indians, right? They don't say what came before that. It's very unfortunate. Physics, right? This is from Scientific American in September 2025, where it says physics is a field of knowledge that existed at least from the time of the Greek savant Thales in 600 to 545 BCE. Right? So it talks about Thales of Miletus, who's called the father of physics. This is from a physics site, History of Physics. So you see this exaltation, self-exaltation, father of physics, father of medicine. All these things are given to the Greeks over here. What is the reality? Is it where it came from? Well, we can see what the Eurocentric sources hide about Thales. There is absolutely no original works of Thales available. Everything we know is second-hand, reconstructed from much later 9th century, 10th century, 11th century commentaries and so on. For example, it's attributed to him that everything is made of water from Aristotle. This is what Thales had said. What is the fundamental principle? Earth floats on water. Aristotle is repeating him. He imagined that Earth is resting on water like a log floating. He thought magnets have a soul because it attracts, moves iron and so on. And he also predicted an eclipse according to Herodotus and so on, based on probably Babylonian or Egyptian cycles. What we are seeing is a very primitive description. This is what they call as physics. When you say, why is Thales exalted for physics? These are the reasons, because he tried to understand the natural world in such a primitive fashion, and therefore he's called the father of physics. Okay, so this is the exaltation made about Thales. Now we go to Vaisheshika. In Vaisheshika, I have just taken from Major Basu's translation. I've just given you from the preface of the foreword, the table of contents. I've highlighted a few things. You can't read it from back there. In this, for example, when he's talking about investigation of action, okay, right there you see, it's a very, very scientific way of talking. Vaisheshika is all about pratyaksha anumana, which is perception and inference. It's a basis of scientific thought, where we build new truths on the basis of older truths based upon perception. Vaisheshika, Rishi Kanada is saying there are two kinds of perception, external and internal. He's saying external can be mistaken. For example, you mistake a rope on the road, on a poorly lit road at night, you think, oh, it's a snake. But then there's light there, you say, oh, it's only a rope. So external perception can be mistaken. He's saying perception through the mind, through reason and logic, that is a better form of knowledge. This is what we see. The basis of scientific knowledge is contained in Vaisheshika, and he's got chapters over here. In the absence of an impediment, a body falls from gravity. right? So he's saying basically the cause and effect is contained in Vaisheshika. He's saying there's got to be a cause. If there's no cause, nothing can happen. This kind of cause and effect is the basis of our physics over here. You're seeing such an advanced thing over here. It does not go upward nor sideward because there is no impulse towards those directions, meaning that there's got to be a cause to change something. Then on nature and motion, movement springs from impulse which produces impetus, and gravity destroys the impetus, the body falls. So saying even though you throw something up, gravity is pulling it back, and that's why it falls. You're seeing amazing physics knowledge in Vaisheshika Sutra itself, and that is what I just given you two snippets that show how vastly superior Vaisheshika is compared to Thales, who had a primitive idea of physics. And you might ask, okay, how old is Vaisheshika Sutra? There's a logical question to ask, and we got to address that. So I've shown in my talks the antiquity of darshanas, right? We know that Kapila, who is associated with Samkhya, he's mentioned the Rig Veda itself. So we can put Samkhya oldest along with Rig Veda. Then Rishi Kannada Vaisheshika is mentioning Samkhya and Mimamsa, but he's not mentioning Buddhism. So we can put Vaisheshika here because he's mentioning Mimamsa and Samkhya. So it's after that. Then Buddha has used Nyaya Sutras. So Nyaya is also before Buddha. Buddha is also using perception and inference, right? That means Vaisheshika is prior to that. Now, when is Buddha dated? That's the next question. According to the Puranas, it is 1800 BCE. According to the Western dating, about 563 BCE. In either case, it's far more ancient than Thales. You're seeing Vaisheshika is far more ancient than Thales, but West will not acknowledge him, right? So we are seeing Eurocentrism over there. Talk about geometry. This is a Scientific American from June 2025. It's talking about how ancient Greek mathematicians, given a circle, construct a square the same area using only a compass. So it is trying to form one more object of the same area. If I say a circle has got this much area, construct a square of the same area. Those kind of problems. Not always is it possible because we have irrational numbers and these kinds of things. And now there is a strategic erasure. By calling out only Greek mathematicians and ignoring the rich abundance of math in Shulva Sutras, Eurocentrism erases Indian math innovations, implying that only Greeks worked on such geometrical problems. Reality is, we are seeing in Bodhayana Shulva Sutra itself, it is desired to transform a square into a circle with the same length. He is giving a process, an algorithm. He is giving an algorithm on how to do it in Bodhayana Shulva Sutra. Squaring a circle, that specific one, he's gotten, I'm not going to read all these things, he's giving you a construction, and based on the construction he has given, we can now estimate what is the value of pi according to Bodhayana. So we can now say the value of pi is 3.088 according to this sutra, but in other sutras you get different values of pi, meaning that Bodhayana is aware that in different situations he must use different values in order to do this transformation from one object to the other. That is what you're finding over here, and evidence is clearly over there. And so the reality is, what is the timeline of Bodhayana? Max Muller said Bodhayana is 800 to 700 BC based on linguistics. Thibault, another translator in 1897, he put into 800 BC compared to study of Shulva Sutras. B.B. Lal, Subhash Kak and others, they put him greater than 1000 BC based on astronomical content and other such things. Satya Prakash, 900 to 800 BC on language and geometry. Kim Lofker, she put him to possibly 800 BC and before Apastamba, who is 500 BC based on mathematical history. Seidenberg, an origin of mathematics, he said it could be as early as 2000 BCE for Bodhayana. So what you're seeing is, you're seeing a range of dates here. Now, most of our people, meaning our students and so on, ask Bodhayana's date, go to Wikipedia, 800 BC. Because some Westerner has said that. Where is the reality? How do we know what methods did he use to date Bodhayana to that period? So this is the data they've used, linguistics and other such things, which we had discarded earlier. Earlier we said linguistics is an outlier. You can't use linguistics. It's a failed methodology. So I go into the details over there. When I saw this image, I said, whoa, this is now from Kalibangan, excavation in Kalibangan showing what we have in modern Indian homes, tiled floors and so on with patterns. You see this pattern. When I saw this pattern, I said, hey, this is a mathematical figure. And it turns out to be this. I'm not going to read all those things, but it turns out to be something over here, which is also coming from Bodhayana Shulva Sutra. How do you construct a square using circles? He's given a process. How you first drive a stake into the ground, tie a rope to it. you mark the east-west direction, draw a circle, multiple circles, eventually you get this 4-clover pattern over there. This pattern is exactly what you're seeing over here. Now, the question is, this came from Kalibangan, 2800 BCE. What is it doing? Encoding a metaphor from Baudhayana's Sulba Sutras. So here I've got archaeological evidence that is saying Baudhayana should be 2800 BCE based upon this archaeological finding. I'm not using racial theories of Aryan invasion to put into 800 BCE, right? That is what the Westerners have done, like using linguistics and things like that. We got far more evidence to place him to a much earlier time period, and we got some more evidences for deep antiquity. If you look at the textual and linguistic analysis, Baudhayana's Sulba Sutra is using old Sanskrit, not classical Sanskrit after Panini, but before Panini, that kind of language it is using, archaic forms, sandhi patterns, grammatical usage consistent with earlier Brahmana literature and other such things. Language is comparable in grammar, vocabulary, Taittiriya Samhita in Yajurveda, Shatapatha Brahmana, again by Yajnavalkya, Apastamba, Katyayana, Sulba Sutras, they all have the same language. So based on linguistic affinities and the language used, we now put it on earlier period. In my talks, I've shown to you how Yajnavalkya, Shatapatha Brahmana, that says Kritika does not move from the eastern direction to find the east. That means Kritika is the vernal equinox. I have dated this to 2982 BCE, approximately 3000 BC, 5000 years ago. So through this, we can say the language is related to Shatapatha Brahmana, 3000 BC. Archaeology from Kalibangan is 2800 BCE, which implies we got two strong lines of evidence that's saying Baudhayana should be much earlier than what Westerners are admitting. Baudhayana has already given how do you change the shape from circle to square and all those things, and Greek astronomers, or rather mathematicians, are talking about that, and Westerners exalt these people. So you see this is a recurring pattern. This is one more Eurocentric claim, the so-called Platonian solids, right? Plato is supposed to have talked about these things in Timaeus. Timaeus is famous work in 350 BCE, where he said tetrahedron is the fire element, cube is earth element, water, air. This is basically the Panchamahabhuta that we have in India, that he's internalized to having shapes. These are the shapes that he says. And for example, you see the foundational Greek philosopher Plato writing this match these 5 Platonic solids, the 5 supposed elements, earth, air, fire, water, star stuff, and so on. So that's the bottom line. And he pairs cubes, the stackable shape, with earth. My question is, what are the antecedents of this whole thinking? We have that in Samkhya philosophy. Samkhya philosophy itself is based on various tattvas that we have, right? It starts right from Prakriti all the way down to Tanmatras and other such things. That is where we are seeing the Panchamahabhutas over here, along with the Tanmatras, along the Karmendriya, Jnanendriya, and so on. So we have got an enumeration of nature that is done in Samkhya philosophy. We already have an idea of all of these things. But beyond that, we go to yantras, mandalas, and other such things in the Samkhya tradition. In Tantrism, for example, according to Wikipedia over here, Akasha is symbolized by a black egg, Vayu by a blue circle, Agni by a red triangle, Apas or water by a silver crescent, and Prithvi or earth by a yellow square. So we have right here the foundation of geometrical shapes associated with the Panchamahabhutas appearing in the Indic literature, Samkhya literature itself. We are seeing these things going to an early period of time, and Plato has clearly taken things from here. And Prithvi's associated smell, form, structure, heaviness, mass, and in Charaka Samhita, for example. In several other traditions, we are also seeing these things. We are seeing circle, hexagon for Vayu, triangle for Agni, which is upward pointing, and Apa or water is downward pointing triangle, and for Prithvi it's a square. So these are the shapes that Plato has taken and made them into more 3-dimensional objects. From these 2-dimensional objects, it's made into 3-dimensional objects, much later. Now, where is the link? Because I made a claim and an assertion, I must now provide you the proof, right? How did Plato get to know about these things? For that, we take a look at early literature, Anacalypsis by Higgins, where he's quoting the historians, Eusebius. He's saying that the people in Egypt came from the river Indus and planted themselves south of Egypt, and they crossed from the Red Sea from Arabia. Herodotus, another historian, who says there are 2 Ethiopian nations, one in India, other in Egypt, And where did he get the information from? From Egyptian priests. Philostratus, another person who says Gymnosophists of Ethiopia, who was settled near a Nile river, descended from the Brahmins of India. And one more person says the same thing. Now, why is this relevant? Remember, I told you 2000 BCE there was a monsoon failure in India, and Indians have gone out and settled in Nile river, in Euphrates river, and places like that. And these people have settled and shared their ideas over here. And these have percolated all the way down to these Roman historians' time. They've got a much better vantage point than us, because they lived 2000 years ago, these historians, right? So from that point of view, they're talking about the history, and this is what they're saying. So this is one set of evidences that I give. Another set of evidence is from Clement of Alexandria. He was an early Christian priest, right? This is from Christian writings. So he says, Plato does not deny he procured all that is excellent in philosophy from the barbarians, the pagans, Indians basically, that he came into in Egypt. And the barbarians honored their lawgivers. He's basically talking about the Brahmins over here. Philosophy was cultivated by the Brahmins. They were defied by the race of Egyptians, Chaldeans, Abrahamians, and so on. So now a second person from the vantage point of 150 BC, the current era, he is talking about Indians having settled there, and Pythagoras and Plato learning from these people in Egypt and repeating these things. So this is a transmission mechanism. I made a claim saying Plato has copied from Samkhya philosophy and got the so-called Platonian solids, and this is the evidence for that knowledge transfer itself. Now going to Ptolemy, Indian astronomy, I'll close soon after this. I have a set of slides here and we'll stop over there. So there are several allegations by Western historians of science on this, starting with the colonial era historians. They allege that advanced parts of Indian astronomy like epicycle model, trigonometry, mean motion tables were borrowed from Greco-Roman sources, especially Ptolemy's Almagest. This is a source of great consternation for the Europeans, because they presumed knowledge is the apex of, rather astronomy is the apex of knowledge for them. If the Indians have advanced astronomy, it's like it's not nice for the Western civilization. So they had to somehow show Indians have copied it from Ptolemy and places like that. So they claim that Indian texts like Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya contain the same elements, epicycle, eccentrics. They look structurally similar to the Greek system. Therefore, Indians copied from the Greeks. Later scholars like Bentley and others, they allege that Indian Siddhantas were reworking of Greek astronomy brought into India around 500 current era, and the mainstream Western chronology puts Ptolemy's Almagest in 2nd century current era. Aryabhatta and the classical Siddhantas are dated much later to claim that Indians could not have influenced Ptolemy because these are later works. That's how they dated them. So the influence is the other way around. And this argument is used by them to dismiss ancient Indian astronomical references that appear to be much older. For example, Surya Siddhanta has got much things we can date from precision, using precision. So there are critics like David Pingree, systematically framed Indian astronomy is a derivative of Greco-Babylonian knowledge. Both Neubauer and Pingree set the stage to make such assertions that Indians have copied astronomy from the Babylonians and the Greeks and so on. And a common assertion is that translation that happened in Baghdad was a vehicle where in Baghdad, Greek works were translated to Arabic, right, Almagest, because the Muslims got hold of those things in where today's Damascus and other places are, they got these things. Indian works like Surya Siddhanta and Brahmagupta's works were translated into Arabic by Al-Fazari and others. And from there, they say Muslim cross-pollination happened. The Muslim scholars took Greek knowledge and Indian knowledge and they made these works, and therefore that is why it appears advanced. That is where they are saying Indian knowledge has come over there. And Western historians are alleged it is not an independent tradition but a secondary recipient of Greek knowledge in sciences. This is the way it is positioned, very, very unfortunately. But then we look at the facts. The first fact we ask is, okay, you're using Almagest. Where did the Almagest come from? What is the provenance of that? Well, the date is 150 current era, where he's supposed to have composed this work in Greek in Alexandria, but there are absolutely no surviving copies of that original work. In the 9th century, the earliest Greek manuscript was found in Byzantine. 9 centuries later, it is preserved in the Vatican today, that 9 centuries later. In 820 current era, there's an Arabic translation on this caliph in Baghdad. where in the 9th to 10th centuries, there were revisions by further Muslim scholars over here. 12th century in Toledo, Gerard of Cremona, he translated from Arabic to Latin in Toledo. In 1451, this person George, he produced a Greek to Latin translation. 1460, this very influential man, Regiomontanus, he prepared this summary of Almagest, which was hugely influential for all the colonial scholars. And 1538, this was printed after the Gutenberg printing press came about. It suddenly became printed and people started using these things. What are we saying? We are saying there is no original Ptolemy's work. Whatever was got was reconstructed in Europe in 1451, 1460 and those time frames when they've already got Indian knowledge from translations in Toledo. They're passing that off as Ptolemy's early works. That's what we're seeing here. Now, until the 15th century, Europe only knew Almagest through Gerard of Cremona's translation. Then this 9th century Byzantine Greek text became accessible in Renaissance. This George translation 1451, Regiomontanus in 1460 and the printed edition in 1538. So by the time the European Orientalists and colonial scholars in 17th to 19th century, when they were comparing Indian astronomy with Greek, their standard reference was this Renaissance era printed editions, much later ones. This is what C.K. Raju also has said. C.K. Raju's works, he has shown some of these things where he's saying this is how this happened. These original works are not there. These are reconstructed works that are done on the basis of inferiority complex of the Europeans, right? To show they have as superior knowledge of the Greeks and so on. So the question is, which version the critics rely on? It is not the lost original Greek manuscript. It is not the Byzantine Greek copies. They worked on the 1538 Basel Greek printed edition and Latin translations. This is what they worked on. So if you take a look at the contents, the spherical astronomy framework, Almagest is saying a static Earth, static, Earth is not rotating, static Earth, spherical at the center, static over there, and the celestial sphere that is moving around us. All the stars are moving at the top, but Earth is fixed. That's the biblical ideas over there. Surya Siddhanta explicitly says Earth is a sphere standing unsupported in space, and Aryabhatta rotating is talking about that on its own axis, and the rotation of daily motion of stars is because of Earth's rotation. This is what Aryabhatta has explained. You're seeing vastly superior knowledge in the Indian works as compared to Ptolemy's works. So there's a more advanced model in Surya Siddhanta and a primitive model in Ptolemy, geocentric fixed Earth. So Surya Siddhanta explicitly allows Earth's rotation, Ptolemy is rejecting it. If you go to trigonometry and chord tables, did I skip one over here? No. Trigonometry and chord tables, Almagest uses something called a chord function with a table based on 360-degree circle and a base radius. Surya Siddhanta is using the jya and the kojya, which is the basis of our sine and cosine and things like that. It's advanced trigonometry. It is using that. So Indian sine tables predate Almagest chord tables. Indian sine tables are computationally simpler, and Ptolemy's chord tables can be derived from the Indian tables. So we are seeing far more advanced knowledge in Surya Siddhanta. It's also given difference formulas in Surya Siddhanta on how we can construct the sine tables. If you look at epicycles, epicycles are a very advanced form of astronomy in the ancient world when they're trying to explain why is it when you look from Earth, it looks like Mars is happily going from east to west, but suddenly it turns around and goes retrogressive, right? How do you account for the retrogressive motions using a cause and effect cycle? In order to fit those things, they had something called an epicycle model, right? So in this epicycle model with a deferent and equant point, Surya Siddhanta is giving epicycle model for planet, sun, moon with parameters similar to Almagest. Surya Siddhanta's concept of that a manda and a shigra, a slow epicycle and a fast epicycle to account for the anomaly. We have elliptical orbits, right? We don't have circular orbits. How do you account for that? That was done through these two to correct for eccentric and retrograde corrections. And this structural framework is already present in Surya Siddhanta. Indians had something called pulsating epicycle model, where the radius of the epicycle shrinks and expands based on which quadrant you are. Why is that important? Why is that important? Because the Earth, when it is going around the Sun, it is not going at a constant speed. As the Earth approaches the Sun in the elliptical orbit, it speeds up. As it goes away from the Sun, it slows down, right? Speeds up and slows down. To have a mental picture, think of a pendulum. when the pendulum is swinging, its velocity is 0 when it goes to the top over here, right? Kinetic energy is, rather, potential energy is maximum. Now when it goes toward the center, the velocity is maximum over here because Earth's gravity is attracting it over here, right? It's maximum over here, again goes down over here. Very similar, the sun is attracting the Earth. So when the Earth goes close to the sun, the perigee and the apogee over here, perihelion, apohelion, it comes over here, it becomes very fast. As it goes away from the sun, it slows down. How do you account for that in our mathematical tables? Because we had the Panchanga and other things that would clearly tell you about these things. How do you account for that? Those things were done in Surya Siddhanta by having this Manda, Shigra, epicycle with deferent, accounting for ellipticalness, accounting for the speed, the variational speed and all that. Very, very advanced models. Very advanced models were shown over here and far more accurate than Almagest with pulsating epicycles and so on. And the solar and lunar models, Almagest had geometrical models and lunar elongation, whereas Surya Siddhanta had got numerical models over here, rules for solar longitude, lunar longitude, corrections and these kind of things. Eclipse computations, again geometrical rules. We had in Surya Siddhanta a detailed eclipse doctrine including the shadow cone, computation of obscuration, magnitude with mathematical formulas. Whereas the Greeks did not have mathematics the way we have it. They didn't have positional arithmetic, they didn't have the numerals that we have, they didn't have zeros. They had a geometric tradition. So everything was done in geometry for them. Till Leonardo da Vinci, till that time they were using geometric tradition. Indians were using algebraic tradition. So Surya Siddhanta, you got algebraic formulas that are talking about all of these things. So Surya Siddhanta explains in verse. The verse means we had Kattapayadi system. We had got Aryabhata's numerical system where Sanskrit verses were used to encode numbers, right? So that's how Surya Siddhanta explains it. Ptolemy is giving it in Greek geometry. So Ptolemy's sidereal year and Surya Siddhanta's sidereal year, Surya Siddhanta is far more accurate compared with Ptolemy. And the zodiac and star catalog. This has got a catalog of 1022 stars, zodiac of 12 signs. Surya Siddhanta much earlier as 27 nakshatras with a Rashi model and other such things. So what we're seeing is that the Indian model is far more ancient than Ptolemy's model and contains algebraic computations where the Greek tradition does not have that. So how on earth can you say Indians copied from Ptolemy? If they copied from Ptolemy, we'd have a geometric idea. But we have got mathematical ideas over here, algebraic ideas over here, clearly different. I'm now going to Nilakanta Somayaji, who was a Kerala school astronomer mathematician. He had developed a partial heliocentric model in Tantra Sangraha, if you read that. His brilliant insight, what was his insight? He noticed that the geocentric Shigra epicycle model can be reinterpreted naturally if the inner planets, Mercury and Venus, were tied to the sun, right? He said that Mercury and Venus must go around the sun. If I do that, I don't need that Shigra epicycle for the retrogrades and things like that. He also noticed the outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, orbited the sun and not the Earth. So he proposed a partial heliocentric model where I think I have a picture, where do I have a picture? Yes, this picture, where he said that the moon goes around the Earth, the sun also can go around the Earth, but Mercury goes and Venus around the sun, including Mars, Jupiter, Saturn go around the sun. That was his model that he proposed. It's a brilliant insight by doing this. So we are seeing that in his model, the inner planets that position always close to the sun in the sky, he explained that by positioning Mercury and Venus revolve around the sun itself goes around the Earth, and that explains these things in a natural way. Outer planets, he proposed, they also revolve around the sun. The retrograde motions, apparent backward motion, is simpler to explain because of the geometry that he described by these things. And in effect, the sun carries these planets as it circles the Earth. He still thought the sun is going around the Earth over here. And this was his model. And this model was used by Tycho Brahe. So Tycho Brahe proposed exactly the same model as Nilakanta Somayaji 150 years later. I have shown in my talks that the transmission school was through a Portuguese admiral called Castro, who came to India. He was a scientist, this man. He has taken this model from Kerala, where Kerala School of Math was, and he's taken it to Portugal, and he was a buddy of Tycho Brahe, and that's how he's got this knowledge, and he proposed the same thing. And I don't think I'll read all these things, but you can compare Nilakanta Somayaji's model of eccentricity and Copernicus' model of circular orbits to see how much more advanced Nilakanta Somayaji's model was, despite Copernicus' model as father of heliocentric ideas. But he had circular orbits, whereas Nilakanta Somayaji had accounted for all the eccentricities and so on. There's one more claim. The Hindu armillary sphere is copied from the Greeks. This is the armillary sphere, and we should be sad as a civilization because we don't have these things anymore in India. Very, very, very rarely do we see these things, and the reasons for that are twofold. When the Muslims invaded India, the Delhi Sultanate, people like Alauddin Khilji and his eunuch general Malik Kafur, when they came to the Deccan, they would take anything of value, including the instruments, bronze instruments. And he says he had thousands of camel loads and bullock cart loads of metal taken away from India to Muslim countries, where they melted all these metals down to make their spears and things like that. So we don't know how many of these things were lost. When the Europeans came, they took the rest of these instruments, and now they are in museums all over Europe. You see Indian instruments there. So we don't have this in India anymore. But we are seeing that this is very much there in ancient India, where this person, colonial Weber, he's claiming that all our astronomical instruments were derived from Greek sources transmitted after Alexander's invasion. Thibault, another colonial historian who translated astronomy works, he's saying that this too, the Goliyantra was a Hellenistic importation because of the similarities, but he admits there is no direct textual transmission that has been found. It is purely based on similarity of form and function. Neubauer, who was the professor for David Pingree, he says the same thing. Repeated early European assumptions that armillary sphere was influenced by Greek sources. He also recognized India had independent mathematical traditions. His statements are largely inherited historiographical biases rather than proven historical findings. But this is repeated. Encyclopedia Britannica, Wikipedia, wherever you go, you'll find Indian armillary sphere was copied from the Muslims through the Greek sources and things like that. Where is the reality? What are the facts? Colebrook was an American in 1700s who translated mathematical works from Sanskrit into English and so on. He compared the Hindu armillary sphere with the Greek and pointed out that Hindus have not copied the armillary sphere because the construction differs considerably. And he remarks about Brahmagupta, Surya Siddhanta and all of these things and how it works. So here I'm saying description of Goliyantra and Bhugola, they appear in Aryabhatya, Surya Siddhanta and Varahamira's Pancha Siddhantika. There is no trace of Greek terminology in the construction of the armillary sphere. Bhugola supposes a rotating earth. This concept is alien to Greek astronomy. They were not doing that. And later commentaries, Bhaskara II, Siddhanta Shiromani and others, they developed the armillary sphere in the Indian mathematical frameworks based on sine function, not the Greek chord functions. So we are seeing a lot of differences. I was very lucky because on Flickr is that photo social media place. On Flickr, I found this man had shared from the Rajasthan Kota Palace. If any of you are lucky enough to go there, please do go and see there in the courtyard, you'll find this. This is the Indian armillary sphere. Perhaps this is the only copy existing in India. You can see that construction. This construction is given in Surya Siddhanta. And Bhaskara II, Siddhanta Shiromani, he says, this circle is for Venus, this circle is for Mercury. He gives a procedure how to calibrate it. He says, through an orifice, you first find Revati Nakshatra. Once you find Revati Nakshatra, you align it, just like today's modern telescopes. Modern telescopes, first you must align it. Once you align it, then you can say, go to Mars, go to Venus. You can see all these things with a computer. Similarly, so Surya Siddhanta, we got a procedure how to align this and how to start using it for observations. All those things are present. So Kota Palace in Rajasthan, please do go and see. This is the Indian armillary sphere. Hipparchus in 150 BCE and stellar brightness. This is from Astronomy Magazine, November 2025. Yes, I buy Astronomy Magazine. I'm an enthusiast. And I was shocked to see in a question and answer session where they're asking astronomers question, what is the baseline for determining stellar magnitudes, right? So here the person who's answering this, the professor, is saying the first observer to catalog differences in star brightness was a Greek astronomer, Hipparchus. He created a catalog in 135 BCE of so many stars in 6 ranges. This is what this system was used for 1,500 years in Europe. Once again, it exalts the Greek astronomers while erasing much earlier Indian works. Where are the facts? Surya Siddhanta. Surya Siddhanta, for every nakshatra, we have a stellar brightness. Surya Siddhanta has categorized category 1, category 2, category 3, star brightness. We look at a nakshatra, how bright is it? Rohini is much, much brighter than if you take a look at something else, right? Revati is very faint. Kritika, you can barely see Kritika in today's Bangalore. You can't see it, forget it. You have to go to a dark sky location to see it. So these are very, very faint stars. So we are saying Ashwini is category 3, Bharani is category 5, Kritika is category 3, Mrigashirsha category 5, and Punarvashu he put in category 1. So these things, evidence is clearly there. Burgess' translation of Surya Siddhanta, we are seeing the categorization formula that is given there for each of these things. This is now at least 600 BC. Why do I claim 600 BC? Because the version of Surya Siddhanta that Burgess used has got the nakshatra starting with Ashwini. Why is that relevant? In India, the nakshatras are always aligned with what was the nakshatra at the vernal equinox, a New Year. New Year was always vernal equinox. At vernal equinox, what was the nakshatra? That changes because of precision. 600 BC, Ashwini was at the vernal equinox point. That is why we say the version of Surya Siddhanta we have is 600 BC from that version. In that version, we are already seeing the stellar magnitudes given over there. Clearly, Hipparchus was not the first in 150 BCE. We are seeing that Surya Siddhanta itself has it. Okay, I have one more section on precision. Now, precision is this movement that the Earth is doing, right? It traces a circle in the sky of 26,000 years, you're seeing Pingree over here in his publication 1972. He says Varahamihira has noticed these things, but he says it is not unreasonable to suppose that the idea of trepidation of precision was introduced into India by the Greeks, though the parameters chosen by the Indians are their own. In a scientific paper, you have an uncertain language, right? It is not unreasonable. What kind of convoluted language is that? So he's got no idea. He's just putting those facts as factoids over there, which is later on repeated by a whole lot of others. So the ideas of the textual evidence we have of precision phenomena is right there in the Vishnu Purana. In the Vishnu Purana, when Vishnu has come to Dhruva, who is unhappy in his home, is run away from home because he can't sit on his father's lap, because the second wife of his father pushes him away, saying, "You don't have place here." So little boy goes and does tapasya for years. Bhagavan comes, "What do you want, Dhruva?" Dhruva wants nothing. He says, "Okay, after your time, I'm going to make you into a star in the sky." And he says, "You will reign here for a period of one kalpa." Your reign over there as the Polaris, as the North Pole, will only be for one kalpa. What does that mean? Right in Vishnu Purana, they know your period is not permanent. You're going to change because of the precision, your position is going to change. That we are seeing over here. A fixed point for Dhruva's reign, it is temporary, it will change with time. Then Professor Iyengar, in his publication, he's shown in Brahmanda Purana how there's a verse over there saying have the metaphor of a potter's wheel. The potter's wheel at the center, it looks like the clay is not moving at all. At the sides, the wheel is moving very, very fast. He's using that analogy to say Dhruva sitting at the center, he's rotating as if he's just sitting over there. Other things are moving on the wheel. In another place, he's saying over here in the Maitrayani Upanishad, he's saying this particular king, Brihadrata, he's asking a question to the Rishi over here. Why is Dhruva drifting? Why is Dhruva drifting from the north central position, right? He's not there at the center. He's talking that question. So North Star, understood by us as fixed, has changed its position. So very, very clearly by 1500 BCE, Indians have observed that precision phenomena is real, that things are moving around, Dhruva is not permanent, and so on. So the Westerners are claiming that Hipparchus was the guy who first did this. So Ptolemy is quoting Hipparchus. Ptolemy itself is a repeat much later, but he's quoting Hipparchus, where he says that the solstices and equinox move backwards by 100th part of a degree every year. This comes to approximately 36,000 years. The reality is 26,000 years, but by this formula, it is 36,000 years. But then Professor Iyengar is talking about both Parashara and Vriddhigarga. Both of them have been quoted by Panini. If we accept the date of Panini as 800 BCE, That means Parashara and Vriddhigarga before Panini itself, right? So he's referring to them, and Vriddhigarga, he's saying that in the Saptarishi cycle, he's saying that 100 years per nakshatra, that reference is over there. P.B. Kane is talking about that over here. According to this theory, the Saptarishi would turn from nakshatra to nakshatra, remaining 100 years in each of the nakshatras. This can be translated as 36,000 years. According to Professor Abhyankar, it is 36,000 years. Now, what are we saying? We are saying Vriddhigarga, in a period of time before Panini, before 800 BC, he has quoted the figure of 1/100th of a degree per annum. That is already there. And Hipparchus is repeating the same number. Hipparchus had access to the Library of Alexandria, where he has used some of these ideas that have been translated over there. In my talks, I've given more details about these things. Surya Siddhanta, that itself is given. The circle of nakshatras rotates 600 times in a Chaturyuga, right? It is given a formula how it goes in the sine wave pattern. And I've shown over here, using the computation by Dr. M.L. Raja, I've shown over here how if you do this computation for Ayana Chalana, it comes to 54 arc seconds per year. The rate of change of this precision, okay, in 1 year, it goes by 54 arc seconds. To give you an idea, if I extend my fist at arm's length into the sky, it is extending 10 degrees, depending on the size of my fist, anywhere from 15 degrees to 10 degrees. If I extend my pinky into the sky, it is extending 1 degree. You can imagine 1 degree so much in the sky. We are not talking degrees. We are not talking minutes. We are talking seconds. Surya Siddhanta has got a number, 54 arc seconds a year. That is how much precision is shifting per year. Without telescopes, without advanced instrumentation that we have today, electronics and things like that, our ancestors are able to accomplish this kind of accuracy in that ancient period of time. And I've talked about this table in my earlier talks. I won't spend time. Surya Siddhanta, 54 arc seconds. Vriddhigarga, 800 BC or earlier, 36 arc seconds a year, 1 degree in every 100 years. Hipparchus repeats the same figure as Vriddhigarga in 120 BC. In China, in 300 current era, 72 arc seconds per year. Aryabhatta, 48 arc seconds in a year. Al-Batani, 54 arc seconds a year. The Arabs had copied Surya Siddhanta directly. That's why you see Surya Siddhanta's numbers in the Arabs, and so on. It gets better and better by the time you come to Bhaskara II and Patani, Samanta, Chandrasekhar. Indians have got better and better numbers. Linguistic chronology, what I only want to show here is linguistics is supposing 1500 BCE as the date of Aryan invasion, thanks to this idea of Proto-Indo-European language expansion and so on. And the question I'm asking is, how can Vedic concepts be in place in India prior to the so-called Aryan invasion? Because our Brahmanas, Upanishads are showing through astronomy very great antiquity. So I'm rebutting Max Muller's chronology. Max Muller said Chandas period, Mantra period, Brahmana period, Sutra period. He said Chandas period is 1200 to 1000 BC when Rig Veda's books were composed. Mantra period is this time frame. Brahmana period from 800 to 600 BCE when Samaveda, Yajurveda and all these things are composed. Sutra period, that's when the Vedangas are composed, 600 to 200 BC. But the reality through astronomy, what we are finding is that Vedanga Jyotisha itself can be dated to 1400 BC. If Vedanga Jyotisha is 1400 BC, where is 200 BC for Sutra period, which we get from linguistics? No comparison. Shatapatha Brahmana, 3000 BC, Kritika over there. But according to Max Muller, it is 800 to 600 BC. These are from Rig Veda, the story of Aditi and Ashwinis, and these are much more ancient timelines, but then he thinks it was composed in 1200 BC. So very clearly, Vedic astronomy can rebut much of these assertions, and that's what I said here. There's evidence of failed methodology in colonial scholarship, and by extension in today's academia. This is what we call confirmation bias. So there are some things that you accept. Aryan invasion 1500 BC, biblical creation date 4004 BC, that is the belief. You also accept this Colebrook's idea of Vedanga Jyotisha 1400 BC because it is within this 1500 BC date. But you ignore all of this evidence. There is so much evidence that I've shown over here. You ignore that as unreliable. That's what Max Muller did when he was confronted in Europe saying, should all of Indian astronomy chronology be held hostage to biblical chronology? He was so upset, he wrote this book. In this book, he said, all Indian works are unreliable, and not robust. Well, that's one way of dealing with inconvenient facts. You tear down the data, you say that this is useless, unreliable, and you push your idea. That's what he's done here. We call that confirmation bias. And these views are used even today by Indian scholars. So in summary, origin of civilization, Western claim, civilization began with Greeks and Romans, others are barbaric or prehistorian. The reality is civilization arose independently, and we have some references for these things. Mathematics, Western mathematics begins with Greece, then to Renaissance, then to Newton, a huge jump over there. But the reality is decimal system, zero, algebra, everything came from India to Islamic world, translated to Europe, and evidences are here. The number system, the so-called Arabic numerals, are a European adaptation from Greek Arab traders, but they are Indian in origin. From Brahmi, we can show how it went to Nagari, to Arabic, to Europe, and so on, and evidences are over here. Then the claim in astronomy, scientific astronomy began with Copernicus and Galileo. But then there is pre-Copernican heliocentric or planetary models in Aryabhatta, Bhaskara II, and so on, and Europe has borrowed these things through Islamic astronomy. We got evidences. Medicine, Hippocrates and Galen are the founders of modern medicine, rational medicine, but Ayurveda, right from Shushruta Samhita, Charaka Samhita, and so on, which went to the Arabs and then to Europeans. We are seeing this over here. Chemistry, modern chemistry, the claim is it began with Robert Boyle, right? But the reality is Indians were using this rasayana and other such things. We're using alchemy, distillation, metallurgy. These things have been known in India for a pretty long period of time. Philosophy, the claim is rational philosophy is uniquely Greek and European. But then we are seeing our Nyaya, Samkhya, Vedanta, and all of these things addresses long before Greece. Music and aesthetics, Western tonal harmony and classical music are the apex of world art, but the Shastric music we have, Natya Shastra, Datilam, and others, these predate European theory. Printing and technology, Gutenberg ushered in literacy, but then the movable printing type was in China. If you go to Harappa, we are finding copper blocks that are used for printing. We are seeing the negative of the seals that are using in Harappa. This technology has gone to Europe, to China, from China it has come into Europe, and so on. And if you see navigation and geography, Europeans, they claim to have discovered the world, but then the magnetic compass, cartography, they came from China and other such places. Indian Ocean was already globalized by Indian merchants. Our Vaishyas are already doing trade with Southeast India, with Arabia and places like that. History and chronology, Europe's dating of antiquity to biblical chronology defines everybody else, but Indian Chinese chronology are much, much more ancient. Industrialized and mechanical inventions, this industrial revolution was a uniquely European achievement, but the precursors, textiles, chemistry, steel, hydraulics, they are all in India much, much earlier. Modern science is, as Western, scientific method apparently originated with Francis Bacon, Descartes, and with Newton and people like that. But then we are seeing Vaisheshika and others are already there, Nyaya Sutras, logical, rational ways of examining the natural world, has been there in darshanas for a long period of time, which went to the Arabs. Al-Hayatham. Al-Hayatham was a guy who proposed a so-called scientific method, and Francis Bacon has merely repeated whatever Al-Hayatham has said. Al-Hayatham was influenced by the Indian works. Linguistics and philology, comparative linguistics, began with Europeans, according to them, grammar and things like that. But Panini's Ashtadhyayi and others is the world's most sophisticated grammatical system. It influenced the later, much later European linguistics. English didn't even have a grammar till they came across Paninian works and things like that. So, concept of modernity according to European enlightenment, secularism, industrialization, but non-European modernities, for example, urbanism in India, going to Saraswati Sindhu, going back to ancient times, Chinese bureaucracy, they all were there before Enlightenment. And unfortunately, Enlightenment is universalized, although it's just a local experience. In conclusion, I hope I've been able to communicate to you that Eurocentric assertions falsely exalt themselves as the father of medicine, father of astronomy, father of trigonometry, and all of these things. But what I've shown to you is that Europeans have plagiarized, erased, and usurped Indian achievements repeatedly. I gave you a random selection of a few things there. Hopefully this will become a series where we'll expose more of these things. And this is a repetition of the conclusions I've shown earlier, very relevant to this. What we study today in schools and universities is utterly wrong. These frameworks, the colonials, Eurocentric, missionaries, socialists, and the Marxists, they are controlling the historiography of India even to the present time. Thankfully, NCERT is finding its voice today, and the 6th grade has been corrected, and soon corrections will come for the other grades too. But it's taken a long time. 70 years is too long for this civilization to have waited. We have messed with generations of Indian students who have internalized Eurocentric ideas and notions, whereas erasing our own ancestors' ideas. This is a criminal act by the earlier NCERT chairman. Those guys should be put behind bars for their crimes against India. And we are seeing linguistic methodologies used to prop up the narratives of these guys. I've shown to you linguistic methodology does not align with evidence from many other fields, therefore it's falsified. We've seen antiquity in archaeology, genetics, astronomy in the text. We have very strong evidence to uphold antiquity of Indian civilization. And using evidence-based narration, we can discredit Aryan invasion or migration because this constrains Indian chronology to 1500 BCE. We urgently need to revise our education system. Okay, with that, I've come to the end of my talk. So thank you very much for your attention.